Hi everyone. So today, the topic that I like to put forward is working with people and the frustrations behind that. Obviously, there's great things, but we're not here to talk about those things. It's not just working with people, it's that working with other people who have different ideas and stuff and different ways of doing things. And that brings up a conflict because sometimes you're going to be right and sometimes you're going to be wrong. But as I've said many a times, is everybody knows they're not always right, but no one knows where they're wrong. Because if you knew where you were wrong, you would just change your opinion. So you have this flawed view where you know there's going to be a flaw somewhere, you just don't know where it is. So when do you give up too much? When do you give up too little? When are you sacrificing two good ideas for one average idea that just tries to keep happy? And when is keep people happy more important than the idea or the way you do things? And again, like I said, there's loads of times and loads of moments where this is brilliant and beautiful, but I'm just talking about in those sticky points where there's a different way to skin the cat. You trust everybody or you don't trust everybody or however you feel about those people, but you have to work with them and you have to achieve something together. So I guess take it to the bottom, because you can probably think of more things that frustrate and the emotions and the actual work, slowing down the process that come from trying to make sure everybody's ideas, everybody's respected, their voice is heard. It's the same idea of autocracy versus democracy in a big team, isn't it? But I'm even talking even simpler from the people who are your peers. So you two, for example, working with you, and how do you do that in a way which doesn't make you lose your love for one another? Take it to the bottom.
Yeah. This one can definitely get taken. I mean, people become mortal enemies over this stuff, right? Refuse to work with each other. I think there's something you mentioned in there as well about being right and being wrong. It's not even always as simple as that. Like sometimes it could just be two different ways to do the same thing. And two parties are adamant that their way might be the better way or the preferred way, for whatever reason. And then you can't come to an agreement on that thing, and it just brings about stagnation, and a general sense to want to murder the other person. So there's loads of ways that can go to the bottom, but just off the top of my head, that's one that comes to mind, that I've experienced.
I'd even add, in trying to fix, and I'll say personal, and Jankee might have experienced this one from me, is sometimes I'll notice that conflict has happened, realize that it doesn't matter too much which way you do it, and try and reintroduce that other person's idea, but then you come across really condescending, I find. Because then it's like you're saying, oh, now I've said it. So I don't know. So it can end up becoming this whole people pleasing. I'm not just talking about between us. I'm talking about different groups of people you work with, different things we will do, partnerships, friendships, where you end up getting this place where you're not sure anymore. Is, am I single-mindedly focused on the thing I'm trying to achieve? Am I trying to keep everybody happy? Am I trying to keep myself happy? Because I believe there's so many variables that can cause frustration.
Yeah, well, that's the word that I was going to use, is that frustration. But once you've set frustration in between a relationship because one person doesn't feel like they're being heard, or one person always feels like they're in charge, we've seen it in our company constantly, is everyone's on the same level, but once there's that one thing that gets said, the rest of their relationship is now based on this one event that took place, and it has damaged loads of relationships. So, but that it's that frustration, is that it's not even logical, but because this one thing was said this one time, then other person in front of you is constantly labeled to be that way. Oh yeah, she's difficult, like that.
Yeah. So how do you? Because again, there's so many. It affects self-esteem. It slows down work sometimes when people aren't buying into something because they think their way is different. And I was even talking to someone recently who's part of like a writer's room, and she was saying that it's so hard because they set a path to go and it feels like it's being challenged all the time. When do you limit new ideas? Because just because you said something in the first place, someone might have a eureka moment and now they've got to ignore something that their better senses are telling them. But again, sometimes you do need to do that, because otherwise, if people continually make new ideas, you'd never make progress. So it's one of those tricky ones, and it probably isn't a single answer for it. But what is the thing that you'd even look to mitigate against first? Is it how people feel? Is it that business results matter first only? Like, is there, even if you get the results, do you justify it? It's like, when someone tells you to take a left turn early and you go a different way, they always go, I would have been quicker if you went left. How do How do you determine that? You just don't know. So how do you win this one?
Well, yeah, it's to make it even murkier. You mentioned something about the business first or the relationships first, but you know, it doesn't. You can go business first at the expense, or if you do something that jeopardizes the relationship, that in turn will jeopardize the business outcomes. So I mean, it's it almost feels like there's not much winning. I know we're supposed to be coming up with solutions.
It's like once you're in the trenches of this, it's just, do you become the bigger person and accept it and say, fine, I'm going to make myself be the sacrificial lamb? But then if the business gets affected too many times, then you're going to have your own resentment. And then similarly, like, and then even how do you, if you're both of equal, 3 of you, 4 of you all equal level, how do you share that amount amongst each other? Do you shout the loudest that day?
Oh no, that's never going to work.
There you go. So how do you even come to those?
Well, if you're talking, it depends on what groups of people you're talking about.
Mhm.
If it was a someone in charge of a group of people, then, or it was a meeting, the chair should really be controlling that. So if it isn't supposed to be discussed in that meeting, don't let it happen. Set an action where those people can go away and talk to each other, perhaps. But what I feel like you're talking about is a group of people who are probably equals.
Yeah.
Oh, I think it is checking yourself and understanding other people's and what their intention is, but then also asking questions to say, can you see it be done this way? And like women have to do it a lot. They have to say things in a hedgy way to introduce stuff. Like you and I actually speak very differently in our meetings, Deola. I'll use lots of words like, oh, should we consider this? And I'm not saying that you don't, but I know I have to specifically do it because I can be too loud sometimes. So maybe it's creating some of that hedge to make it a question that people feel like they can be involved in, rather than just another idea that someone else is going to throw out that you're trying to meet whatever objective it is you're trying to meet. But the other thing then is, if it is all about business objectives, then somewhere down the line, maybe not everyone's clear about what the objective actually is.
Yeah. So clarifying the process helps, and clarifying, even I'd go as far as saying clarifying decision-making processes helps. Which is why a lot of boards just have voting, and it's that's it. You lose the vote. And then another more democratic way, I think you have to accept you add a levy of time to whatever decision you're making. And you must have to accept that we're gonna have to add in the extra minutes or hours or days or weeks that it takes for everybody to get closer to buying in. And then the last thing I'll say, if you're on the weak side of that, the bit where it hurts, is you have to lick your wounds quickly. You can't smart about when your thing wasn't followed. You can't stay upset. You have to appreciate that. If I wanted to do it my way, I have to do it alone. Once I'm in a team, I have to sacrifice some of my ideas, some of my thoughts, even if I believe I'm right to the day I die, and lick my wounds and go to the next thing. Almost like The Apprentice, when you can see someone's not team leader and they're just tanking it. It's like, well, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't.
And that goes both ways though, because if, for example, you always feel like you're conceding, then that's probably not healthy for the person who's always conceding. So it is having a conversation with the people around them to say, I feel like my ideas aren't really being heard. And I
was going to ask a question there, because that was one of the things I introed it with, in terms of you have 2 good ideas, you end up doing neither. You can get to the point where everybody feels like they're always conceding, but no one else sees it from the other perspective, so they feel it's just them. But everybody's constantly thinking, everyone is going, I never get it my way. But it's because you haven't realized we're in a team, and it never is your way when you're working in a team.
Absolutely. Compromise means that nobody gets exactly what they wanted. And as people that are, if you're in a leadership position and you're working at high level and you've all kind of got there through your own grit and your own whatever it is, then unfortunately compromise is going to be something we just don't get it. It's in like in a relationship, a compromise, you're going to have to give and the other person's going to have to give as well.
And in a relationship, people often forget that the other person is giving too when they get to a bad place and they think they're doing all the giving. So can I ask a question to round it then for both of you? And I think we're in a position where we can personalize it a bit this time. So one wacky and wild and one very professional and sensible way of dealing with, for example, in our trio, if there's an idea that you had that the other 2 didn't have, or one of the other did too, what's one way, because we're equal status, we work together, no one's above or beneath the other, how would you do that in a crazy or wacky way, and how would you do it in a way that's more reasonable to get results both ways?
What are you feeling, Jankee?
I don't know what the crazy one is, because that's just
No,
rude.
no.
I can't think of something that's acceptable.
But that's also going to work as well, though.
Well, so okay, here
With
is
us.
here is one that is crazy
Okay,
because it's not quite feasible, right? So what you could do, something that I've been doing a lot recently is trying to like divorce myself from my personal attachment to wanting to do things a certain way, and kind of just look at the data, right? So what does the data say? Does the data say it's better to go left, or the data say it's better to go right? So one reason why you can't always do this is because it is time consuming, but ignore the consumption of time and just do all the things and analyze the data on all the things, and then find out which way is best and which way isn't.
It's reasonable if you have the time, of course.
Which you won't.
And if you have the data.
Which you would get if you spend enough time doing the analysis on each option.
Okay.
Which is why.
Fine. And Jankee, what do you think?
Well, whilst you were saying that, I had a mid one. So not that crazy, but also not that sensible, which was just alternate the times that you say yes and no. So that you
tally.
I said no last time, so say yes. But only do it with yourself, so that nobody else knows you're doing it. I think the normal thing is that communication thing is one, to make sure your relationship hasn't been affected. Your baseline relationship hasn't been affected because of a disagreement or something that happened at work, but also to constantly professionally put your position forward. So it's partly what Charlie's saying. It's, I've got this data and this is why I think it's going to work, or this is the information I've got because me being in this position, I'm having to keep an eye on things, and this is my assessment of the situation. And if you're laying stuff out logically, then and having conversations to look after your relationships, ultimately that is enough to keep everyone ticking along, because I think inevitably people are going to bump heads. That's just how it is.
So I say thank you for both of your advices. I would say that might lead to a second part of this, with the third variable being time. And we all know that in pressurized situation, time makes both of the things that you both said very difficult to do with a rational head. And so that introduces another element that you have to think about. But yeah, I think that's this pod.
Cool.
Lovely.
Ciao.
See you.
Bye.